Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We are absolutely just enchanted with having Theodora Scarrato here. And to give you some background on her, she is the Executive Director of Environmental Health Trust, which I've learned has been in existence for over 10 years, and that is just amazing. Environmental Health Trust is one of the leading scientific environmental health organizations working on 5G, small cells, and cell phone radiation. Theodora frequently presents to policymakers, develops educational campaigns, and publishes scientific research, all within the realm of Environmental Health Trust. And she also coordinates scientific programs with international experts and research institutions. And we are honored that she lives here in Maryland and is able to provide us a wealth of information on 5G, on the current issues and such. And then I'm Margaret Siklosa. I'm a co-leader of Montgomery County, Maryland chapter of Holistic Moms Network. And Holistic Moms Network is a 501c3 non-for-profit, connecting parents who are interested in green living, holistic health. It was founded in 2003, has over 100 plus chapters across the United States. And again, we have one locally here in Montgomery County, which that is why we're co-hosting here, Theodora, because we have a public hearing coming up specifically on 5G. And we hope to spread this message, spread awareness, and then obviously connect the dots in terms of specific action items moms, dads, teenagers can take, because pretty much anyone, the door is open to anyone to speak publicly about this. And there is so much education. Actually, if you go to ehtrust.org, you will find a dearth of information. It is really quite overwhelming, but Theodora will be talking about most of that today. So as far as the agenda goes, she will be talking about what 5G is, the environmental impact of 5G, what is going on nationally, internationally, and we will have a specific focus on Montgomery County, because again, it's in the works, in the plans, and there will be a vote coming up here shortly. Affecting all the citizens here in Montgomery County. And then we will obviously take questions as they come. Feel free to let us know that you're here, let us know where you're from. I do believe we do have some friends joining from across the country. So thank you. Thank you again for being here. Thank you, Theodora, for lending us your valuable time. And we do hope to be finished up by 2:30, just so you guys can plan your time accordingly and post any questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will answer them as they come up. Thank you so much. Thank you, Theodora.
Okay, great. Well, I am going to share my screen to just explain what is 5G, what is the concerns about health and the environment, and what is happening in Montgomery County. So the first image that you're seeing here is actually 3 examples of what 5G is looking like in different cities. So when we think about what is 5G, 5G is the 5th generation technology, which is going to tie together the Internet of Things, which is our phone connecting with all manner of devices that we probably can't even imagine, including your dishwasher, washing machine, home security system, and everything that phones do and more, plus machine-to-machine connections, self-driving cars, all kinds of smart city applications, and more. So in order to have that happen, the current technology doesn't have the ability to tie all of that together. So they're putting in more antennas closer to homes. And the FCC has stated that to deploy 5G, they need 800,000 small cell sites in the United States alone. Millions, obviously, will be needed worldwide. So here is an image of the first one is someone's apartment window, and you can see there's the antenna that was popped on top of the street light. A pole went higher, and there are antennas. The next image is I was at a hotel actually in San Francisco, and I looked out my window. I had had very high readings in the room, and there it was. This is my picture, and you can see how close that antenna is to the people right down from me. And then the third image is really important because all of these antenna structures that we're talking about will have electrical boxes. And here's an example of the bottom part of a small cell where they haven't undergrounded the technology, meaning it's not underground. There are all these boxes which are large. And as an example, in Montgomery County, the new zoning which has been proposed will allow electrical boxes up to 12 cubic feet, but I could not find a limit on how many boxes that it can have. So this is something that concerns a lot of people as well, because of course property values and just having this big ugly thing in your front yard. So I've talked about a little bit about 5G as the 5th generation technology, but it's important to know that this is in addition to the current technologies that we have. It will be another layer on top of the 3G and 4G that we have. And in fact, a lot of the cell antenna sites that are being built are going to house 4G antennas as well, closer than they've ever been in our rights of way in our front yards. And as an example of what's happening in Montgomery County, your street lights can go up, I think, 6 feet. Your utility poles can also go up more feet than that. And we would not have a public hearing or public any way to stop it as a homeowner if it's at 60 feet or more. With the new zoning, cell antennas can still be within 30 feet from homes, but there would need to be a public hearing. But the problem is that this ZTA actually changes the process of that hearing, and it is more industry friendly. And companies can also batch their applications, and batch means they can do several antenna applications all in one time. And if there is a hearing, you know, you might have 100 people affected, but when they go to the hearing, it's those 100 people on one side and industry on the other side, and each side gets equal time. So this is an industry-friendly change to the entire hearing process. I talked about how the electrical cabinets can be up to 12 cubic feet. And there's no limit on how many that there can be. This is the 4th attempt to streamline and make more industry-friendly the laws in Montgomery County. And this is all happening right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Montgomery County and then what people are doing in response. Now, you might ask, well, where are the proposed antennas and what do we even have right now? And I'm really thankful that the county actually put this up. This is a map it's an interactive map of the current sites we have and the proposed sites. So the squares are existing antenna sites and the circles are proposed facilities. Now, this is not everything that we will have in the future because there's going to be much more. If this passes, there's going to be the ability to, of course, put them far more than this, but this is what we have on the books now. And just as a close-up, here is an area of North Potomac where it looks like they're sort of testing the ability to even do this. There are a lot of new applications. And when this happened a few years ago, community members were so outraged that they packed hearing rooms, packed meetings, opposed to this sort of rollout. Here's an example, Brickyard Road, of an antenna in front of a home that was built. But as it turns out, the permit, the application, wasn't even for that location. And you can imagine what it must be like to wake up and see this in front of your home. The family who lived here tried to get this moved for many years. And every authority she went to pointed to the other. I don't know what's happened recently, because last year she testified at a hearing, you can watch it online, and said something has got to be done. There's no enforcement. I've been trying to get this off my property, my front yard, and I can't. No one's able to do that. So how can you make it easier to put these up when we have so many problems with the current poles we have up now not even following the rules? And actually, MC, the Montgomery County, there's a group in Montgomery County, the Montgomery County for the Control of Cell Towers, which continues to document this sort of situation where there are antennas put up and they're not following the permit that was applied for. So wireless companies warn their shareholders of future risk, but not their customers nor residents. And here's an example of what is stated in the annual reports of the companies that are erecting these small cells, quote unquote small cells. There's just really nothing small about them, except they're shorter than tall cell towers. If the radio frequency emissions from wireless handsets or equipment on our communications infrastructure are demonstrated to cause negative health effects, potential future claims could adversely affect our operations costs or revenues. We currently do not maintain any significant insurance with respect to these matters. And actually, almost all, I think all the cell tower companies in the United States have statements comparable to this, where they say there could be a risk for the future. It could affect our revenue. And then they say we don't have insurance. And they don't have insurance because insurance companies won't take the risk. They stopped providing insurance for cell tower companies years ago because the risk was rated as high. And just recently, Swiss Re came out with a report on 5G and rated it as a high, and has a whole section called Off the Leash 5G. So this isn't just scientists who are ringing the alarm bell. Insurance companies are saying, you know what? There's a long latency between we can see effects, could potentially see effects, and we need to, we don't want to risk our money. So some other things to know about small cells and 5G and wireless is that there was no pre-market safety testing for long-term exposure with wireless devices or these networks. 5G is going to take what we have now and make much more exposure. So we already have a problem, according to scientists worldwide, and now there's going to be a substantial and significant increase in exposure to people, and it's involuntary. Because we won't be able to, you can turn off your cell phone, and hopefully by the end of this, everyone will have their cell phone certainly off at night. But you can't turn off the cell tower outside of your window or outside of your kids' play area. My kids at the house, we just moved, but at the old house, we had a tree in the front yard, right under the utility pole. My kids played in there. They played house under that tree. They climbed the tree. And now, will that be a safe space? How do we know what the levels are there? So science shows impacts not only to humans, I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but to birds, bees, and trees. And in Washington, D.C., which is a test city for 5G, several tree groups came out in opposition to just allowing all of these antennas with concern for the impact of the tree canopy. And there is also the issue of, I think I talked about property value dropping because of these cell antennas in front yards. In looking at research on cell towers and homes with line of sight to the cell tower, they have found 5 to 20% property value drops. So what will be with one of these in front of our homes? You think about that home I just showed you before. And then there's the issue of the carbon footprint. And there are several reports. We have a web page on ehtrust.org where we list these reports and the key findings. Most recently, the SHIFT report out of France came out saying we are not meeting our energy efficiency goals, and what we thought was a worst case scenario may not even be as worse as it can get, because you just imagine there's all of these billions of new devices, all of these worldwide millions of new cell tower sites. It's true that these individual small cells will use less power than a large macro cell tower. However, this is adding hundreds of thousands of more of them. So of course there's going to be an increase in energy use. And these are going to be everywhere. So there is documentation on all of the carbon footprint, and they are calling for a reduction in use of digital devices, actually, as really the only answer here. So a lot of people ask, well, don't they have rules? Don't we have allowable limits for how much cell tower radiation we can be exposed to, or how much radiation can come from a phone? And there are limits that the US adopted in 1996. The Environmental Protection Agency was developing federally developed safety limits, and they were defunded. Prior to that, there used to be a robust, with a lot of money, US government research programs looking at what are the effects, what are the effects at the cellular level, how does wireless, which is radio frequency radiation, and electromagnetic radiation of different frequencies affect our bodies. And that started getting defunded in the 80s, and then right before 1996, it was defunded, just as they were going to set proper federal safety limits. So then the FCC adopted limits based on industry groups' recommendations. These limits do not protect us from biological effects. They're only about heating effects so that tissue isn't overheated. Here is an example of how cell phones are tested. There's limits actually for cell phones and limits for the amount of radiation that's allowed to be in the air. And here is a nice plastic head filled with liquid. It's kind of a sugar liquid. And that's almost like a large thermometer inside. That is based on the head of a 220-pound male. And that is how cell phone radiation emissions are tested. They have not, and in the limits that we have, there's not documentation on effects on children that looked at children's long-term exposure. Or pregnant women, the developing babies. None of that was even available in the 90s, except actually the limits that the US took on are based on science from 10 years prior. So here we are with outdated limits. And we are now rolling out the largest, this huge deployment. Now, our limits, the limits are a little complicated for different frequencies, but I just wanted to give you a visual of how, in comparison to other countries, the United States allows much more radiation than specific countries in mostly Europe, although China and Russia also have lower allowable limits. So this is for the 900 megahertz radio frequency electric field. And you'll see Italy, Belgium, Bulgaria, Lithuania, Poland as having lower allowable limits. There's actually it's even more complicated than this, but what's happened is, and Switzerland also has a more protective limit. It's not protective, but it's more protective. In those countries, industry is saying, well, to roll out 5G, we have to increase the allowable levels in your communities. And people are protesting nationwide in many countries around the world. Here is in Switzerland, where because of the organization and the action, the country is now starting to talk about measuring the radiation. They are also, they have banned new small cells in certain municipalities because of councils and cantons voting to do so. This is a group of German doctors, German doctors who are issuing a proclamation to stop 5G. There are actually literally thousands of doctors across the world signing halt to 5G statements of various kinds. You have the International Doctors Association for the Environment, the EMF, the United Nations EMF appeal, the petition to halt 5G on Earth and space. Here is a recent image. There was a huge protest in Rome 2 days ago. And here they are in front of the Colosseum with a sign. There's also a whole video. If you go online to Stop 5G Italia, you'll be able to see videos from the major protests that just happened there. And they have, I think at this point, over 68 cities who have literally signed moratoriums on 5G. Okay, so, and then in the United States, there are cities, especially in California, but not only in California, that are passing ordinances to retain as much authority as they can and limit the rollout of small cells. Here's a picture from, I hope I say it right, Encinitas in California, where they had a city council meeting. And I just heard back that their update is that they are looking at restricting locations within residential zones, any location within 500 feet from a residential dwelling unit, and within 500 feet from a daycare primary school. I know Los Altos also has no small cells within 500 feet of a school. There are several cities which have banned small cells in residential areas. There'd have to be a hearing with a determination that that was needed for service before even putting one in. And we have all of this online at Environmental Health Trust Protective Ordinances on 5G. Burlington, Massachusetts has a whole annual process of recertification that they put out, because like a lot of cities don't have any plan in place for if someone wants to apply to put cell antennas up. There's no procedure, there's no permitting process, and all of that needs to be developed. So if you're in, and that's happening in Montgomery County certainly, but if you're in cities here, if you are in another city, find out what are the ordinances that you have, what does the zoning say, is there a state law streamlining these into your community? There's some states that have passed bills or are in the process of passing bills that make it super easy to put a cell tower in the right-of-way in front of your home. And we have a whole list of what's going on. I know Berkeley's in the middle of having this conversation as well. Oh look, there's a typo. Okay. There are also states that have passed bills which are to make a report on the safety of 5G, on the environmental impacts and the health impacts. And here is an example of one, which is, I don't know why it's doing that, so sorry about that. There you go. The New Hampshire House Bill 522, this passed. There's New Hampshire, Louisiana, Oregon, and Vermont have established either commissions or their health authorities need to study the environmental and health impacts. And I really recommend that people check out House Bill 522. It's a great model to look at. They call for a commission. The commission meets regularly. They're already meeting now. They're having many experts from all sides of the fence testify. And then they're going to have a report. And in the bill, be sure to read the whole thing. Scroll down to the end and you'll see all the questions that the commissioners need to address. And I'll just read one. Why have thousands of peer-reviewed studies, including the recent US National Toxicology Program 16-year, $30 million study that showed a wide range of statistically significant effects like DNA damage, brain and heart tumors, infertility? Why are they being ignored by the FCC? And why are FCC limits that are set 100 times higher than other countries? And so they have all of these great questions that they ask that really are my questions. Oregon's bill is relating to exposure to radiation with a focus on schools and children. And they are putting together a report of the independent scientific literature. Again, all this is on our website. The American Academy of Pediatrics has repeatedly written to our Congress and to the FCC saying FCC limits are outdated. They're only based on heat. And, another thing I should add is devices aren't even tested touching the body. Phones are not tested. For example, you might rest the phone up against your chest. You might put it in your bra. Your kid might be holding it and carry it, and little babies have cell phones and they're like cuddling the phones. Those positions are not even tested before they come on the market. And when phones are tested and devices are tested in close proximity to the body like that, they find that they exceed our outdated FCC limits. So the AAP has been calling for an update. And there was also a government accountability report asking for the FCC to review limits. And what happened was the FCC opened up a docket, of which there are over 1,000 submissions, and has not acted to create a report or show any proper review of all of those submissions. You can also, and this is really important for parents, and I'm going to ask one of these questions here in the chat. If you go to the American Academy of Pediatrics healthychildren.org website, you can see on their page on electromagnetic fields, a hazard to your health, statements about some of the research showing living near towers is associated with the risk for developing headaches, memory problems, dizziness, depression, sleep problems. So the AAP has information. It's not enough. There needs to be an update actually, but this is really important that they acknowledge, and actually they recommend reductions in exposure to children. And I'm going to be talking about that too. They have 10 recommendations on how to reduce exposure to children.
Thea?
Yeah.
We do have a related question because we are talking about health effects of 5G. There was a question on the effects of 5G on metals in the body. So if someone has, either type of an implant, this particular question was relating to a wire from chest surgery. And it seems like they're very electrosensitive because when they come near the 5G towers, they actually feel it, after exposure. So are there any studies or research or anecdotal evidence on the effects of metals, of having metals in your body and then being exposed to 5G?
Yes, well, so I'm not going to talk about 5G specifically, but rather wireless radio frequency. So 5G is going to include all the frequencies we have now, low and mid band, as well as incorporating millimeter waves and sub-millimeter waves, and more so in the future. But to your question, yes, there is actually, we have a whole section on our webpage on metals. There's research showing that metal implants, metal on the body, like even jewelry, can change the way the radio frequency is absorbed into tissue and actually increase the exposures to certain areas. Because you think about a mirror, if you have a mirror in the sun, you know how the sun can hit it and then it can reflect out and you can start a fire, for example. The frequencies can be reflected, reabsorbed. They can bounce around in ways that are not anticipated, that we don't necessarily expect. And when researchers have looked at metal in the body and on the body, they have found increases to specific areas of tissue. And that we have actually links to a lot of those studies. Now, this is extremely important. And I showed you that picture of the plastic head, right? Where we have this plastic head filled with sugar liquid. This is how devices are pre-market safety for tested. They never look at metal. Metal is not included in all of these, the lax pre-market tests that we already have. And this is something that has resulted in scientists saying the test we have, the SAR test, is not applicable. This isn't real world exposure. Real world exposure is children with multiple devices, people with earrings, implants. That's real world exposure. And no one is looking at that before we roll this out. Here is an example. So children are more vulnerable to cell phone radiation for several reasons. One, there is a deeper penetration and absorption rate into their bodies and brains when compared to an adult, proportionate to an adult. So this is imaging that shows a cell phone to the head. It's a computer simulation, and it shows the intensity, the rate of absorption for the same phone. And you can see the yellow and white are the most intense, then it goes to orange, red, purple, blue, just to show the change in intensity. And in this study, we have all of this online. Actually, this is a publication by some of our advisors, and also our president, Dr. Deborah Davis, was a part of this paper. The younger models are proportionately, the rate of absorption is much higher in their tissue, in the brain, especially in the cerebellum and the hippocampus. And there is up to 30-fold greater exposure in the hippocampus of the younger model and higher in the eyes. There was this study actually specifically looked also at a phone as well as virtual reality, which is like really hawked as a big reason to move out 5G. Is this, you know what virtual reality is? You put the phone in a cardboard apparatus or maybe another kind, and then you watch like 3D things happening through the phone by having the phone up at your eyes. So they simulated the phone connected and what would be the rate of absorption into the eyes. The eyes are very vulnerable to this radiation, as well as actually the testes. So I talked about the hundreds of scientists. This is an appeal that went out several years ago now, stating and clarifying that effects have been found at levels below our guidelines, below the allowable limits. We have a page on our website that lists this appeal, the appeal from Belgium, I think over 300 doctors. The Cyprus Medical Associations just did an appeal. The International Society of Doctors for the Environment, their appeal as well. You can see that. Just gonna go a little bit quickly through some of these things. There's many studies. When you hear there's not research, there is research, published research showing associations between exposure and humans. This is an example of a paper that looked at all the research regarding cancer and concluded that radio frequency is a human carcinogen based on this research. There's also experimental research, like from the NIH study that looked at long-term exposure to cell phone radiation and found in the male rats clear evidence of tumors. I should add, they just published a paper, the NIH scientists, finding DNA damage as well, and stating there's an association. And this was in animals, both in the mice and the rats. And I think they were sacrificed at 14 weeks or 19 weeks, whereas the long-term studies were 2 years, where they found the cancer, from the cancer conclusions. So someone asked about hundreds of birds falling from the sky during 5G testing. I will say this, so this is a question that just came up. We don't have documentation on what that was attributed to. So we only go with what is published in the literature, and so I don't know the answer to that. I do know, however, that there is a substantial amount of research on birds and bees and trees, but I'll talk about birds for a minute. We have a web page on our site, if you hover over science, where you can see a link to wildlife impacts and impacts to bees. We list the studies, we link to them in PubMed, and we show the key findings from these studies. Because birds they navigate, and they found disruptions to their ability to navigate from these frequencies. It disrupts their orientation. Also in this picture, I want to point out, there is, you'll see this picture of the bird with the cell towers. This is actually a report that was put together in India on all of the studies on birds and bees a few years ago. It was an inter-ministerial government report. When it came out, the government of India dropped their allowable levels of radiation down to 1/10 of what it was before, because of so many studies showing adverse effects. There's research on bees that finds impact biochemical changes, changes to honeybee production actually, and inducing stress responses in the bees as well. And that's all online. So of course, when the bees go down, we all go down. Bees are so important, our pollinators. So 5G is going to use not only the frequencies that we have in use now, radio frequencies, but also higher frequencies. And there's a study that was just published that looked at what would the effect of these higher frequencies be to insects. There are two things I want to point out with this study. Again, it's online, it's on our site, you can search it. That is that it says, this is the first paper that investigates the exposure of the electric fields of radio frequency associated with 5G. So that enough should be, we should pause with that for a minute. This is the first paper. How can we be rolling something out when we don't even have the research? And this is the first paper, it comes out in 2018 when we're already, we're rolling ahead really quickly with these higher frequencies in some communities across the world. The second aspect, so what you're seeing is imaging similar to what I showed you about the children, where you can, the child and the adult, where you can see the intensity of the absorption. And what this paper found, this paper only looked at 5 insects. And of course, there are hundreds, I think over 1,000 types of insects. They found that as the millimeter waves, as the waves became smaller, as they became higher frequency, that there was a higher penetration into the insects, to a certain degree, depending on the size. And the researchers warned this could lead to changes in insect behavior, physiology, morphology over time, due to an increase in body temperatures from the dielectric heating. Now, obviously, we're going to be on the ground. The antennas will be sort of up high, you know, but bees and birds can fly everywhere, and they are going to be, our environment and wildlife are going to be more affected than us humans, if you think about it. We're all going to be affected, is what I should say. So this should just be enough. I just found this paper just mind-blowing, really. And you think about birds. Every time I drive down the highway, I see birds perched on cell towers. It's warm. They like it there. So what will be the impact to the birds? Now, the Department of Interior actually put out a letter a few years ago saying cell tower non-ionizing radiation could affect the birds. We already have research showing impact to their reproduction, to their egg laying. So we know enough to know. It's not that we don't know. So someone asked another question about how we have metals in our body and what's going to be the impact there. And I think that's an extremely important issue that needs to be addressed because this radiation interacts with it, water helps it be more conductive, and with metal, there can be reflections and all kinds of things that happen with metal in our bodies. So why isn't this, and I haven't even gone over all the effects. You can go online to delve into the science. We have a page on radio frequency and 5G and scientific citations, reviews where scientists are calling for caution, just point by point over several studies. So if you want to find that, we have it available. But why are our elected officials not doing anything? Well, we have right now captured agencies in charge of the issue. This is a report from 2015 called Captured Agency, how the FCC is dominated by the industries it presumably regulates. It talks about the money. If you just follow the money, it's absolutely eye-opening. There's so much funding of our members of Congress, as well as our FCC, the commission, the FCC commission, are former Verizon lawyers, former lobbyists for telecommunications, for the telecommunications industry, or when they retire, they end up heading the groups, the industry groups. So this is a revolving door between industry and our government that, as Norm Alster of the Harvard investigation says, consumer safety, health, and privacy, along with consumer wallets, have all been overlooked, sacrificed, or raided due to unchecked industry influence. And I would add there was a report by Investigate Europe. You can go online and look up Investigate Europe, 5G, the mass experiment. There's also in The Nation, there was an investigation on following the money and just talking about the long history of really a cover-up. And I'm not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist. This is just factual information about what's happened in our country. No different than lead, asbestos, pesticides, water contamination issues. It's the same story. Cigarettes. In fact, the industry, the wireless industry, uses the same PR firms, the same lawyers, and sometimes you see the same scientists on the stand. as the cigarette industry has used.
Yeah, I have a question that actually came up earlier, but I think it would lend itself to being answered here, actually, a few questions. So given all of this and the fact that, we do have some, we'll call it knowledge sharing between obviously the industry and, governmental agencies, are protest rallies, effective, or what are ways to make our voices heard, better ways perhaps than protest rallies? Or is it truly a kind of follow the money, block the money situation? Like, what is some recourse that we have as citizens?
Yeah, so I think that there's not a one action is going to fix this. It's really a three-pronged approach. So I think that protesting and letting your voice be heard in different ways is actually really important. So there's grassroots work of organizing people. Here's a picture of like Italy, having groups get out there so people see what's going on, sharing information. But obviously that's not enough. There needs to be meeting with your elected officials, contacting these are representatives who have all written the FCC and the FDA and asked for proof of safety. And so I talked about grassroots. There's organizing. It can be protests. It can be press conferences, having meetings, educational teach-ins. But then we need to contact our elected officials and ask them to do their job. Really, if we just could enforce the rules we have, we'd actually get pretty far. Where is the data showing safety? There is no data showing long-term safety from 5G. And of course, those studies have not been done. We don't have exposures in humans to even long-term exposures to show that. However, we have the data on long-term exposures to cell phone radiation. We have the data from the NIH study. And Dr. Ronald Melnick is a 28-year NIH scientist who led the design for the NIH study. And as he says, we cannot assume 5G is safe because of the research the US government did, which showed an effect at non-thermal levels. So let me show you this real quick, because if you haven't seen it, it's really important and it shows the power of people. So this is 3 excerpts that I put together. At first, you'll see in 2018, a mayor asking in a hearing, what about the safety? And constituents are asking me about the safety. Then you'll see FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr respond that of course it's safe and here's why. And what he says is actually false, because there is not a health and safety agency that even has authority to be reviewing the health effects from the cell towers. And then you're going to see Senator Blumenthal, and you should go online and watch Senator Blumenthal's press conference and hear what he's doing, to just doing his job, saying, what are the effects going to be, and show me the proof. So I'm just going to show you this. I think it's
We also need to have very clear direction, talking points, studies that have been done that show that there is no harm to our constituents and to the taxpayers on putting these small cells on towers close to libraries, close to schools, close to their homes. So the FCC, as well as other agencies that are experts in health and safety issues, are always looking very closely at these issues, staying up to date on the latest science.
I just want to say, where is the documentation that our organizations are always looking at this and staying up to date with the science? We want to see the big reports that cite every study that's been reviewed, and to show that they are, and how are they evaluating those studies. We have yet to see that. We've been asking for over a year now.
They've looked at all of the studies and all the information, and they've reached the determination that these are safe. And that's a determination that is constantly undergoing review, and any new information that comes up is taken into account. And in fact, given the position of the federal agencies on this, federal law actually says that state and local governments can't take RF concerns into account, given how much work has already gone into this issue at the federal level.
I'm going to pause that for a minute and tell you something else. Brendan Carr, our FCC commissioner, was the former lawyer for the wireless industry who worked to block the San Francisco Cell Phone Right to Know Act back in 2010 and 2011. He was one of the lead lawyers on that. So he's a former telecommunications lobbyist group lawyer, and he is now at the FCC.
So in December of 2018, I sent a letter to FCC Commissioner Carr asking him to cite for me recent scientific studies demonstrating the safety of this technology. What research has been done, where has it been published and compiled. He has essentially failed to do so and just echoed the general statements of the FDA, which shares regulatory responsibility for cell phones with the FCC. If you go to the FDA website, pretty unsatisfactory. There basically is a cursory and superficial citation to existing scientific data. I believe that Americans deserve to know what the health effects are, not to prejudge what scientific studies may show, and they deserve also a commitment to do the research on outstanding questions. So my question for you, particularly Mr. Gillen and Mr. Berry, how much money has the industry committed to supporting additional independent research? I stress independent research. Is that independent research ongoing? Has any been completed? Where can consumers look for it? And we're talking about research on the biological effects of this new technology.
Thank you, Senator. I think.
No. We got to get this answer. This is super important.
Being backed by industry today. Knowledge there's no active studies being backed by industry today.
But no, I'm not aware of any. So there really is no research ongoing. We're kind of blind here as far as health and safety is concerned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry about that. You can watch the whole thing online if you're interested in learning more about that. What's happening with our Congress. I will say that the FDA has responded with a report which is absolutely inadequate. It was 7 pages with hardly any citations of actual scientific studies. They have yet to share the actual review, which we question even exists. We'd like to see it if it really exists. There's also, a lot of people, when they hear about this, immediately go to their federal agencies to see what do they say. And there's really not a substantial amount of information on everything that, you can go to our website and you say, wow, your website has all this stuff, but how come the EPA says to go to the FCC site? Well, that's a very good question. I can tell you that entire website was changed several times, but last year it was completely what I would call scrubbed. There's no other word for it. Everything was changed on it. And going back a few iterations ago, they actually had a more nuanced approach where it said there's still open questions about safety. That's all been deleted. And we have all of that on our site and show that. So you can think about this like radio frequency and wireless exposures as you would tobacco smoke. There's firsthand exposures when the device is close to the body. There is secondhand exposures when you're near someone using a device where people are getting exposures, adults and children. People will talk on the phone with their baby right here, the baby's head here, and maybe the phone's right here, and the baby's head is also going to be exposed to that radio frequency. Most parents are unaware. I had the ergo carrier. It had first come out with my second child actually. And I would take the phone, put it in the carrier with the baby. I didn't know. No one told me that it emitted radiation and that I should have any concern. I assumed it was safe. I assumed that if it was sellable, of course it was safe. I used to nurse my baby, and I had her babies in the sling, and I had the phone right there in the sling, unaware. So my work now is making people aware of this issue. In Montgomery County, there are several sites and organizations. There's the Montgomery County Coalition for the Control of Cell Towers. That's mc4t.org. You can sign up to be on their listserv. It's not a listserv. They put out emails about what's going on. There's a public hearing November 19th. We hope that whatever your thoughts are, you will show up and sign up to testify. Right now, there's a wait list, but we found that usually everyone gets a chance to speak who signed up, and they really should have a chance to speak. Sometimes the council says, we're going to have equal time for each side, and even if there's like 500 people on one side and 20 on the other, it'll be 20 to 20, and nobody realizes all these other people had signed up, but everyone should really go. There might even be a press conference before this vote, as I understand it. There's a blog, Montgomery County Small Cell blog. There's Twitter accounts that MC4T has. There's TechWise Tacoma Park. And there's Stop 5G Silver Spring. I don't know what their website is, but I know that they've had meetings. I spoke at one of their meetings recently. There's also national organizations, Physicians for Safe Technology. That's mdsafetech.org, which has a lot of great resources and science and updates on what's happening around the world and science. Americans for Responsible Technology, which is a coalition, as well as 5gcrisis.com, which has tools for action, posters, things you can print out, Environmental Health Trust too, but 5G Crisis has door hangers so you can go door to door. What is 5G.info that talks about the health, impacts to humanity, the carbon footprint, privacy issues, all of that. And safeg.net, which is about, but there is safe solution. We're not saying no technology. We're saying we want safe technology, and here is a roadmap for cities and communities to follow. We can have fast and secure internet connections, which are wired primarily, rather than having everything be wireless. And that will substantially allow a reduction in exposure to all of our community members, to children and people who are sensitive and pregnant women, and of course, especially people with chronic health problems. So there's also the Baby Safe Project, I realize I should put on there, where several hundred doctors, I think over 200 doctors and health practitioners and educators are calling for protections for pregnant women. That's Baby Safe Project. So I wanted to just quickly, I want to do questions too, but I have information on what you can do at home as well to reduce exposure, because there are a lot of things that we can do in our homes to reduce our daily exposure. With 5G, it's going to be harder to do these things. I'm in a house in Montgomery County. I have very low radiation levels outside, and inside we don't have any wireless. We've done all of these things. But with 5G, if my street light becomes a tower, I will not be able to have reduced it as much as I have reduced. So remove all the electronics from your bedroom. Remove all the screens, all the wireless devices. Don't sleep with your phone. Use a battery powered, like here's mine, alarm clock, not your cell phone. Don't forget gaming consoles and cordless phones, which also emit radio frequency radiation, and they emit all the time. So even when you're not using them. So you want to have those not in your home are certainly turned off when not in use as a first start. There are gaming consoles, although video gaming and addiction is a whole other subject. Maybe we can do a webinar on that, but get wired connections. You can connect with wires. Shoot, I think I didn't get it out ready for you, but this is an adapter I have for my computer, so I can plug the Ethernet in to this, and then this goes into the computer, and I have wired internet, not Wi-Fi. What if my cell phone is on airplane mode? Is it safe to use an alarm clock then? Someone wrote. Okay. It used to be, and in some cases, airplane mode will turn all your antennas off. However, and unfortunately, we're finding that the newest and latest models will actually, suddenly your antennas will go on, or maybe Bluetooth will stay on, or the location antenna is transmitting. So it's a good start, but we do recommend battery powered as a safe bet compared to the phone. So if you can, at least for your house, you know, when you're traveling, things are different. But if you put your phone on airplane mode, you want to make sure that all the antennas are off. I guess I can go over a little bit about cell phones. You can reduce exposure to cell phones also by only turn on, we'll always have it at a distance if you need to use it, although we recommend reducing exposure as much as possible. But have it at a distance from your head, from other people's heads and bodies, on speakerphone or with an air tube headset. If you have to use one of the antennas, turn all the other antennas off. So there's no need to have all of them on and transmitting all the time. You can have pre-downloaded podcasts, have information, stuff pre-downloaded onto your devices. This goes for your cell phone, as well as your laptop or a computer. There's some times where we might not have a choice of how to connect. If you have it pre-downloaded, you're not streaming, there's going to be less, you're not going to have that radiation exposure. Let's see, with the phone, know when it goes to highest power, even though power is not the only issue with this exposure. Phones and devices go to highest power when the signal's low. When you're moving large files, like movie files, or if you're streaming. So try to not use your device for those applications. Instead, use wired technology, which is faster and more secure. Always keep laptops and tablets on a table, not on a lap. Hardwire them, of course. Have it on airplane mode before you hand it to any child. But even then, it really needs to be on a table because they emit extremely low frequency fields as well. So I just want to make sure I didn't miss that. Get an Ethernet plug for your computers. I talked about this. I think I talked about all of these things. Learn how to, so someone just wrote, if we're streaming, is that dangerous? I would say, like, I am having a live conversation with you, but my connection is wired, not wireless. So I have I wonder if I have an example here. I can't get you the end because I'll unplug it, but I'm connecting with a wire. My computer is connected with a wire. This took me a little bit to figure out in my home, and you got to take a little time, just like with, you know, setting up recycling or getting a water bottle that's not going to have plastic contamination, etc. Do some research. You can hardwire the devices in your home and still do the same things, but with a wire. Utility meters. In Maryland, we have an opt-out to the smart meters, but unfortunately, it's very hard to get an analog, and we really need to be able to get analog utility meters because these emit radio frequency radiation. There also are reports that they have electromagnetic interference in the electrical system, which means the safest way to go with a meter is to have an analog meter. And we should have a right in Maryland to have this, but right now we pay fees to have a digital meter that doesn't radiate, and we can't even get one of these. And this is like a whole issue that needs to be worked on. I also recommend getting a corded landline for your home and office so that you can do the majority of your calls on a safer corded line. Like, here's my phone, and you see it has cord. It's also connected this way to, I can't get a copper line. So if you can keep your copper line, keep the copper line, it's the best. But this actually goes to my modem, which is hardwired, and then I pay the company to have a phone line on top of it. You can get voice over IP, you can use, an online kind of phone system, but that way you don't have to use your cell phone for all your calls, certainly not when you're at home. And you can always, when you go to your house, forward your cell phone to your corded line at home. Takes a while to set these up, but it's well worth it.
Thea, there was a question about how to search for antennas on your cell phone. How do you figure out how many are turned on or turned off? You mentioned location services and obviously Bluetooth, but is there other things that we need to look at?
Yeah, so every phone's different, but on your phone there's a settings where you can turn it on to airplane mode or not, and generally in that area you can find something that says like mobile hotspot, Bluetooth, location, and you can go on or off for all of those. That's where you are able to change the settings for the antennas on the phone. And now when it goes on airplane mode, you can't make calls or receive them. So that's what that means. You want to, like, what I tell people when my daughter's friends come over is I actually email the parents and I say, just a reminder, here's my phone number if you need us. The phones are all off. And that way, because people need to be in touch with their family members, and we need to facilitate allowing that to happen.
Did you know that cell phone, the one in your pocket, emits radio frequency radiation, as long as your phone's turned on, even if you're not talking or texting?
The American Academy of Pediatrics in over a dozen countries recommends reducing children's exposure to wireless radiation.
When using a cell phone, I always keep it away from my body. I use speakerphone or a headset like this. To stop microwave exposure, I put my phone on airplane mode and turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth function.
I hold the phone at a distance and make sure it's not touching my body.
Cell phones are not toys. Children's brains and bodies are still developing and are vulnerable to wireless radiation. Practice safe and responsible habits with yourself and your children.
When using the computer, I always try to make sure my connection is corded, not wireless.
Remember not to use your cell phone in the car. The phone works at higher power in metal surroundings and bounces around, increasing your family's radiation exposure.
For their safety.
For your safety.
Because children are more vulnerable.
Remind them. Remind yourself.
To limit your microwave radiation exposures.
Theo, sorry, one more question. As you mentioned the steps kind of in our immediate control, if you will, within the household, are there any suggestions for protecting yourself and your family outside of the home? Obviously, we have no control over where we have to go or spend time, or, so yeah, anything on that you can mention?
Well, I think that the issue of schools needs to be addressed as one thing. That it's a situation where you have a lot of kids in rooms with a lot of devices, and it's in many cases, in all cases, it's unnecessary. They don't need to be on wireless. It could all be wired, as is happening in several countries. So in Cyprus, they have wired in elementary school. In France, they have a bill where all the wireless is off. So where do we spend our time? At home, at school, at work. So I'm just going to focus on kids for a minute. And that's a whole avenue that parents are going down, is advocating for safe technology in schools. The Maryland, I have actually, if you go to YouTube, you can watch my webinars talking all about this. So please do that to learn more about what people are doing in schools. In Maryland, we have a recommendation by a state body saying to reduce exposure in schools and to have wired technology. Now, work is another situation. So some people have the privilege of putting in wired connections at their place of work. But many people do not. Nor do people all have the option at home to make these changes. And then, of course, there's the financial impact of making these changes, which some people do not have that money. And there are so many environmental justice issues. So be on the lookout, because I want to do a whole talk on environmental justice and related to this issue. Because, you know, even this costed like $35, and we lose them all the time. Unacceptable that we should have to pay. You know, what if you don't have the money for that? So there are people who are truck drivers, work in construction sites, and this is why policy change is what needs to happen. The low-hanging fruit is, I think, the schools, I mean, outside of the home, the schools, and calling for a halt to the rollout of 5G, which would be increasing the levels that we have. Now, there's in the chat talking about clothing and different shielding products. Now, I am very concerned about a few things. In your home, you can do shielding with various materials that you put on the wall. My old home, we actually had a wall where we did that because we were in a condo, and there was routers on the other side, and the family there did not want to remove those routers, and I didn't want that radiation in my home, so I put something up. However, I had professional assessments done, which is really important, because if you put shielding up, you say, oh, there's an antenna over there, and you put a shield up, you can have antennas from the other direction coming and bouncing off them. You can have electrical fields from the charging the material that you're not even aware of, that actually creates another problem. So it's really important to get professional help with any shielding. With clothing, you know, I have concerns about, there are some people, and I'm not going to actually comment as an opinion on it, because I have heard and know that what happens with this, that some people are saying this really helps me, especially when they're completely covered. But a lot of people don't want to do that. They might just want to have silver underwear. You know, there's these underwears people can wear, or bras. But the problem with that, and I've seen imaging studies of, say, bras or other devices, the radiation moves like water. Like you imagine a river, and there's a rock in a river. What happens around that big rock? The water sort of builds up and bubbles up around the rapid. You get rapids. You're going canoeing, you run into rapids. There can be intensities and changes in the way the wave moves around that. There can be more exposure even, especially if you have like a thin amount of shielding. Well, we can't be sure that that is necessarily protective in the way we think it is. And so, so there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. And that is why our government really needs to be taking action on this, because we need to have like a wealth of research showing what's safe, what's safer, and so on. So I do not recommend things that you put down underneath your wireless laptop, for example. There's things, well, you're still getting exposure to your chest, to your abdomen. And what about that? So I wish there were a silver bullet. It's like pesticides, you know, you can not spray your yard, but then your neighbor might spray. Then you have a dog like we do, and then we have to be watching out for who has chemicals on their yard and not to step on. I mean, It's got to be policy change. That's the answer. Meaningful, long-lasting change.
Thea, you mentioned professional assessments. Does Trust endorse any companies? Because there are so many on the market as far as that is concerned, or recommendations for professional assessment?
You know, we don't make official recommendations for assessments, actually. And I'll agree, it's pretty challenging to go out there and to figure out, well, who do I ask and how do I know this person knows what they're doing? But I would always ask, what is your experience in electromagnetic fields? And then also, you know, get, just like you would with anything else, get reviews and from other people who've used individuals who work on this. It's really good to get, so Building Biologists is a nonprofit educational organization that trains people on electromagnetic radiation. And they even have teachers who live in this country and who go around and who come to homes. So they're, you know, you want to make sure that whoever comes is credentialed to take those measurements and has had training. Even the plugged-in alarm clocks are a hazard. Oh, battery operated. Someone's asking about alarm clocks. So this is important. I did not, and I will be doing a webinar. And by the way, we're doing Patreon webinars too, where people can be on the call and ask questions and also support our organization. But I didn't talk about extremely low frequency fields compared to radio frequency fields. And if you're going, what is she talking about? What I'm talking about are different kinds of electromagnetic, non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation. And the power line field, you can call them power line fields, extremely low frequency fields, come off of, actually, like, I don't know if you can see this, like electrical cords, power lines. And if you have a plugged-in alarm clock with cord, there's actually magnetic fields and electric fields coming off that cord, which during times of sleep, you really want to reduce all the time, but especially when you're sleeping, when you want your body to recover. So that's why we recommend battery powered and no cords and no electric powered anything actually near the bed, because they can have, they can create exposures that you can't feel, but they're there, and it's, you know, just keeping them. If you have a battery powered thing, have it away from your bed. Not, some people have it like really close to their pillow. I'll tell you something interesting, and I have this slide up. In different countries, where we have over 20 countries in various capacities educating the public about this, in French Polynesia, they have this fantastic brochure. The government came out with this brochure, and they talk about how to reduce both wireless and cell phone radiation, but also the extremely low frequency fields. They talk about the whole battery powered alarm clock and, you know, not having your bed near a large appliance. So make sure your bed is not on the other side of the refrigerator, for example, or of the utility meter, actually. These are some examples of handouts that we have online that you can print out. If you're in Montgomery County or in Maryland and you come to a talk I give, and I'm glad to give talks to your community on this issue to groups of moms, I always bring these materials as well. We have fact sheets on 5G. We have how to reduce exposure, the AAP recommendations. We have a newsletter. Please sign up for our newsletter. It's once a month. And we have just a lot of what's going on around the world in nationally and internationally in our newsletter. And then we have our Patreon webinars that we've started, starting at $2 a month, where your support to us, we can have long chats like this where you can ask questions, and we interview experts and do deep dives into subjects for you to learn more. and where ehtrust.org is the website. Any more questions about Montgomery County, about wireless in the home?
I don't see any coming in, Thea. Oh, nope, just a thank you. Well, we'd really like to thank you for your time today. Obviously, this information has been invaluable for all the participants. And then from what I understand, this was recorded and this will be available to us for posting and sharing and obviously taking action. But it seems the kind of bottom line, at least, from our perspective, the Montgomery County, Maryland folk perspective, is to get to know your representatives and basically bombard them with information, especially prior to November 19th, and then show up really in support of the freedom to have safety studies and have that information be a little more depth containing than what it is right now. If there's anything else you'd like to add, please feel free to do so.
Yeah, I would add set up meetings with a city council to let them know your thoughts. We always advocate we need to be more engaged in the political process. I know when I started out as a parent and interested in environmental health, I made all these personal changes and I felt like I have my home. I'm like figuring this all out and it was so overwhelming. But man, it's like I just really, the personal is the political, and we've got to get engaged in the political process to sustain, we can have a healthy home, but then our kids go out, right? And as they get older, there's less and less control we have of what their exposures are. And unfortunately, corporations are so powerful and the exposures have just increased so much, pollution and all kinds of other exposures because of the power of industry. So I'm thankful that you had this webinar to help folks get more politically engaged. Go to your city council meeting and speak in your local town. If you live in a town, seeing their mayors who are actually writing to Montgomery County on this and see if they will look at this issue and come to a conclusion. We want a community conversation to start and for our elected officials to be doing their job, which is being accountable to us and our needs and questions. And so thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Probably the most important thing I did, I was involved as a young scientist in the committee that actually reviewed the data and recommended that there be no smoking on airplanes. You may be shocked to hear that it was even a question for science at the time, but it was. And when I look at what we know now about mobile phone radiation, I see some very interesting similarities.
A growing number of prominent doctors and scientists are raising warning flags over radiation this morning, and your kids could be facing a greater risk of exposure.
I think the most important study is a study by the National Toxicology Program in a classic large carcinogenicity test, one of the largest ever performed, and for that matter, one of the most expensive. They found increased risk of the tumors, which we believe radiofrequency radiation is causing in man. Particular tumors called schwannomas. In the rats, they were in the heart. In humans, they're often in the nerve, the ear nerve, the vestibular nerve.
Cell phone providers say they follow all safety guidelines put into place by the FCC. The current FCC safety standard was developed nearly 20 years ago.
The manufacturers actually tell people in the instruction manual, which I've never read, not to put the cell phone against your ear.
it does say exactly that. There's the BlackBerry, for example, warns to keep your phone at least 0.98 inches away from the body when transmitting. With an iPhone, for example, it's 5/8 of an inch.
At this point, the evidence has become sufficiently strong that cell phone radiation is a human carcinogen.
A major development from California's Department of Public Health. High use of cell phones may be linked to certain types of cancer and other health effects, including brain cancer and tumors, lower sperm counts, headaches, and effects on learning, memory, hearing, behavior, and sleep.
If it was a real problem, I would know. If it was a real problem, the government would protect us. How come I'm not hearing about this? They're all things I've heard when I give seminars. You know, I get up there and they say, oh yeah, if this was really a problem, they would have told us. I am they. I am a, legitimate scientist, and I am telling you.
Did you know that cell phone, the one in your pocket, emits radio frequency radiation, as long as your phone's turned on, even if you're not talking or texting?
The American Academy of Pediatrics in over a dozen countries recommends reducing children's exposure to wireless radiation.
When using a cell phone, I always keep it away from my body. I use speakerphone or a headset like this. To stop microwave exposure, I put my phone on airplane mode and turn off Wi-Fi and Bluetooth function.
I hold the phone at a distance and make sure it's not touching my body.
Cell phones are not toys. Children's brains and bodies are still developing and are vulnerable to wireless radiation. Practice safe and responsible habits with yourself and your children.
When using the computer, I always try to make sure my connection is corded, not wireless.
Remember not to use your cell phone in the car. The phone works at higher power in metal surroundings and bounces around, increasing your family's radiation exposure.
For their safety.
For your safety.
Because children are more vulnerable.
Remind them. Remind yourself.
To limit your microwave radiation exposures.